Well, I'm really excited this week. We had a chance to talk with the sound designer, supervising sound editor, Eric Norris, on his work on Spider-Man Homecoming. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about this new film.
Thanks for having me.
I was looking back, I was thinking the first time that I had a chance to talk with you, which was back when you were working potentially on Watchmen, maybe in 2009, or maybe even on Man of Steel in 2013. It seems like you had your hand in a handful of this superhero from different franchises and whatnot. What do you enjoy about working on these kind of action hero films? What is it like?
I would say it's exciting. There's on these big action movies, there's definitely a lot of interesting opportunities for big sounds. So that's probably one of the most exciting aspects of it. This particular film was kind of fun in that there was, from the get-go, when we were talking with John Watts, the director, he said that they were going for this John Hughes vibe, like the high schooler kid vibe.
Yeah, Breakfast Club, yeah.
Yeah. So there was also this other aspect of it, of like fun. And so then we got to put in, fun sounds to go along with that. I'm thinking in particular, there's a scene when it's like a chase scene, and in fact they even reference Ferris Bueller's Day Off in that chase scene, and our edict was to make the sounds fun and pop and punctuate the whole the moment.
The first time that the audience actually sees Spider-Man was in Captain America: Civil War. Were you even thinking at that time that there was going to be a standalone Spider-Man movie? Was that even on your radar?
It was certainly on my radar. I didn't know that I was going to be lucky enough to work on it, but I certainly knew it existed. And I really enjoyed Civil War, and I thought that he was a fun character.
Yeah, and something I was going to say, or was thinking about, was that that's the first time we're seeing this iteration. I mean, there's been definitely a few iterations. You had the chance to work on the Amazing Spider-Man 2 in 2014. So you've been in the world of Spider-Man. What happens when it's being represented again? Are the sounds the same? Are they different? What was kind of the edict from your director? Like, what do you have even to reference as this is the sound of Spider-Man? Is there a template?
Really, the edict that we got from John Watts was really that he wanted it to sound, he didn't want to necessarily reference the previous iterations of Spider-Man. We did know that we wanted to use the sounds that they had established in in Civil War, especially his web shooters, because I had heard that on the mix on Civil War that Kevin Feige had really honed in, and they had spent some time making something that they all were happy with, and we didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel on that. And so I actually spoke with Shannon Mills, who had supervised Civil War, and he graciously handed off those sounds to us. So again, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel with that. But as far as the other sounds, we were kind of on our own to come up with what we thought worked.
And obviously, like, there's some reoccurring characters. You have Tony Stark and May Parker and Happy Hogan and Little Pepper Potts at the end of the film. I mean, Iron Man obviously has a unique sound, and that was kind of established, I think, as one of the first films that Marvel came out with, and that was, I believe, Christopher Boyce who did that. So did you leverage their sounds too for Iron Man, or how does that work?
We did actually.
Yeah.
We had reached out to Skywalker and got a kit of sounds for Iron Man, which we used as the sort of the basis for what we did, and then we did flesh it out. Ben Cook, one of our sound editors, did a really fantastic job of taking what we were given and embellishing it and making it really work well. Some of the aspects of the sound are very, iconic, like there's like a wind-up sound for like when his suit starts up, and like the servo sounds. Those we didn't need to riff on those too much. We had enough from what they gave us. But Ben definitely built on the jet sounds and made things nice and layered that worked, and so it worked well for the Iron Man that we had in our film.
Yeah, I was thinking too. There's also like a handful of kind of voice manipulation. Like Michael Keaton's character as Vulture has an interesting sound when he has the mask on versus when he doesn't. Same thing with Spider-Man. There's kind of variations of how he sounds based on the tools that he's using on his suit. How do you even describe kind of navigation of you and your team of trying to come up with the right tone for a lot of the, these dialogue passes?
Yeah, I really can't speak too much to those because that was all Kevin O'Connell's work. And I know that, like for instance, both with the Vulture, the sound of in Vulture's when he's in his suit,
Yeah.
of Michael Keaton's voice, and then also with Karen, which is this suit voice for Spider-Man's suit. I know that he did treatments on those voices, and then also definitely utilized Atmos.
Okay.
In those to make it sound more immersive, but also not pull it too far off the screen, because then it wasn't tied to the screen as much.
Yeah. What was the idea behind Vulture? Because it's mechanical. It has kind of the influence of maybe alien technology. It's hard to say. It had a really good heavy weight to it. What did you find was kind of the mixture of sounds to bring him to life?
The evolution of that was I had initially started doing sound design on that based on the notes that we were getting from the filmmakers, and sort of up through our first temp was the sounds that I had come up with, which we were leaning more on like fan kinds of sounds, because those fans were so prevalent in the visual. And then as we got further in, it became obvious that we needed to go in a completely different direction. And so at that point, Tony Lamberti took over, and he did the Vulture sounds that you hear in the film. And it's various layers of jets and turbines and metallic elements that create, what you hear. And one of the directions that we were given was to have a very articulated sound, because there's so much sort of visual articulation. And so I think he did a really great job in making that come to life. One of the sounds that I contributed to that did make it into the final mix was I came up with these whooshes using that Melted Sounds. It's a reactor ensemble, a Native Instruments reactor ensemble. Oh, nice. And it allows you to create whooshes from source sounds. And so I loaded it up with a bunch of metal like ratchet sounds. And then they sort of loop up, and then it turns that into like a bi with Dopplers, Doppler sound, the Doppler effect, and that kind of thing. And I also did like metal shing sounds into that whoosh generator. And so that was those were elements that ended up in the mix.
How do you guys represent Spider-Man? Because obviously it's like a lot of swinging, maybe wind types or Foley work. Like, what's the combination of sounds for Spider-Man when he's moving?
When he's moving, it's a combination of web sounds. So it's like rope stretching or Kevlar squeezing, that kind of sound, with like wind whooshes, that aspect as well.
I mean, his real weapon is the web. This web shooting. Like later in the film, you realize that there's a lot more abilities and functionality to his suit, and you start seeing like there's an explosion version or like an electric version. I hadn't really seen that stuff before. Maybe were those references from comic books, or was that just new direction for this?
That is a great idea. I think it's new. I mean, that's a great question. I think it's new, but I'm not sure. And so we just had to come up with that's not something that we could reference before. Yeah. So like for like the web grenade, which was the one where it's like he shoots a grenade, it sticks to the wall, there's like a ascending beep sound, and then it fires off. Yeah. Steve Tickner had come up with some cool sounds for that. And then like the ricochet web, which is one where it has the capability of bouncing and ricocheting off. One of our editors, Martin Lopez, came up with a cool sound for that. They specifically didn't want it to sound like a bullet ricochet. Okay. And he came up with, I think, a really cool sound that doesn't sound like a ricochet, but it still feels like it's bouncing.
And then what was the feedback about this little drone spider that comes out of his suit? That's something I hadn't really been familiar with either. So that was like a cool little sound.
I think that was new as well. The edict we got from the get-go when we were talking with the director about it was that he wanted it to have, a personality, almost like it's a little creature, like Wall-E or something like
Sure.
that. And so Steve Tickner had this really great idea to use a toy that you like one of those toy noisemakers that you blow into, and so he found one. It's actually it's an odd thing. It's like a turbocharger keychain, but it makes a really cool sound. So he got that, and then Andy Sissel and I recorded it. And then both of those guys also came up with a whole other like library of sounds. And then that's what we used when we cut it. And it was definitely one of those things that sometimes when you have sounds, you create a library and it's just a matter of like almost like cranking them in. And in that particular case, it was definitely something that had to be worked to give it the texture and to give it the personality so that it felt like it was a little being.
Yeah. What were some of the record trips that you guys went on? What sounds did you not have?
Let's see. We didn't do a ton of recording. The biggest recording out we did was Marvel has this deal with Audi, and there's a car chase in the film.
Yeah.
And in the film, he's driving a TTS. And when we talked to Audi, they said it's the same motor and setup as an S3.
Okay.
So we took they let us borrow an S3, and we took it up to the desert. John Fasal came along, and then Alex Knickerbocker as well.
Yeah.
And got a full set on the S3.
Did you even have picture lock or any reference of what you would need, or you just go wide with your recording?
Well, we knew enough.
Yeah.
I mean, these films essentially never lock, right?
Right,
I mean, it's
yeah,
just sort of the nature of it. It locks after the print master, which I'm exaggerating here.
Yeah.
But these films, there's no such thing as a picture lock. So, but we certainly had a good enough idea of what we needed. And then it's also, it's wise whenever you have the opportunity to record a car to be out there for 12 hours and to get absolutely everything that you can. So that's what we did. And we had, plenty to work with.
Yeah. And when you are doing records, are you thinking about the fact that you need to, is it a mono-source record, or are you actually thinking about the immersive formats? Are you recording larger spaces?
I mean, we did record like the interior of the car was 5.1, but we didn't have an opportunity to use that. My experience is you try to do the moves that you need as close as you can to what is needed in the film. But as far as panning goes,
Yeah.
it makes more sense to me to mono stuff up, even though you have a stereo recording. I'm talking about like, say, exterior POV.
Yeah, sure.
You have a stereo recording, but a lot of times we just mono it up and then pan it to follow the action, because it feels it's more point source. It ties the sound more accurately to the visual image.
And I guess there are some moments too when you do take Spider-Man's point of view, and you're seeing it through his eyes. You have like the heads-up display, and what happens when you guys are shift? Is that more on the mixer side, or are there actually differences on what you guys are designing?
In this film, I'm trying to think. When we're in his POV, we within his with the heads up display and all that, the sounds were almost exclusively heads up display sounds. In other words, we like split all of the other outside sounds and lowered them. So, I mean, there's that one moment when he's listening into the bad guys, like with the hyper listening capability, and that's was just Kevin did this really cool treatment to the voices, but it was we weren't necessarily treating outside sounds separately. It was more like they're all POV heads up display sounds. One of our editors, Joe Imola, was the one who did a lot of came up with a library of sounds for the heads up display. And nice. I think he did a really good job.
And something, I guess, maybe to give everyone an idea, like, what was the timeline of when you find out about the project, when you're in full design mode, when you actually start getting picture? Like, can you describe a timeline for a film like this, how that unrolled?
I first got a call about working on the film over a year ago.
Okay.
And then it was a matter of kind of working out the crew and figuring out, meeting with, we met with Victoria Alonso, one of the executive producers, who's one of the real forces behind Marvel. Once we had kind of got locked in that we were going to do the film, we actually started on Halloween.
Okay.
And we had interfaced a little bit with the cutting room prior to that and given them a few sound effects, but not really that much.
Okay.
And then once we got started, then we got Picture Such As It Was, almost immediately. And then we started working for like a first sort of temp mix that we had in December. So we had like a month and a half to do that first, get ready for that first temp. And in these films, the visual effects are constantly evolving. So one of our tasks is to come up with sounds that work for the existing visual effects, knowing full well that they're going to be changing in the future. So, and in this particular case, and often in these large visual effects films, they're working under these same crazy deadlines that we are, and we don't see the final visual effects in many cases until the very, very end.
Not only this film, but I mean all the films that you work on that are big summer tentpole films. How do you gauge your own timeline of putting milestones of like deliverables and timelines and just working against the clock of, you have a looming deliverable of having a film coming out, but how do you even describe that kind of relationship with something that's going to take you a year potentially or so, and then also just the creative work that you want to do, and when everyone, like the whole circus comes together and really gets all hands on deck?
When I'm thinking about it, I honestly am not thinking too far down the line. I'm thinking like sort of what the next milestone is. Okay. So like when we first start working on it, I'm largely thinking about the first temp, when the filmmakers really get a chance to see the sounds that we're coming up with. And then as we move through the schedule, it's this balancing act between, they're continually changing the picture, and the cutting room continually wants, sort of updated sounds, and they want the existing sounds to be conformed, to match the new picture. So it's this constant balancing act between conforming, matching our existing sounds with the new picture, and then also elevating the work and making new and cooler sounds to match the new and cooler visual effects that we're starting to see. And then the next big milestone is getting ready for pre-dubs. So that's, because we want to obviously bring to the pre-dub stage as close as we can to the final, but since it's a constantly evolving beast, it is what it is. I mean, we do as best as we can with where we are, visually, and then as we go through the pre-dub process and then the final process, it's just keeping everything in sync and elevating the work.
What could you just describe of like, just because this film is the first time that it's being co-produced by Columbia Pictures and Marvel Studios, and then I guess distributed by Sony Pictures. Do you feel like there is a lot of feedback? You said obviously you met with the producer early on of people from the Marvel team, but what is it like when there's so many eyes and ears that are looking at the work that you guys are doing? How does that at all influence or put added pressure to the process?
I would say no. I think this was very much a Sony. Sony was the one who was financing it, but it was very much creatively being driven by Marvel. Okay. Sony did have creative input. They were certainly involved, but we were dealing more directly with Marvel. Okay. And in fact, this was new for everybody, and they set it up, I think, in a very smart way. Everything funneled through Marvel, so that we didn't get stuck in the middle, getting notes from one camp and then counteracting notes from another camp. That just never happened because they all worked that all out when we weren't around, and we just had marching orders from one set of bosses, basically.
Do you find that the care and attention is different because these characters are tied so closely to just so many other films? I mean, this is, I think, the 16th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, it just seems like the continuity, I don't know, are they even aware of that?
I'm sure everybody's aware of it, but honestly, it feels like on pretty much every film that I work on, or the vast majority of them, people are passionate. Everybody's passionate about the work, and everybody really is trying their hardest. So on this film, it didn't feel any more dramatic than on other films I've worked on, because I've worked on a lot of films where people are just hugely passionate about the work, and this was no exception. I mean, and especially I know that Marvel has a really special place in their heart for Spider-Man, so I know that they were really excited to finally be bringing Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, hence the title for the film.
With Homecoming, yeah. And then I guess shifting gears, how much collaboration interaction do you have with your Foley team? I guess you've worked with Gary Hecker in the past, who was supervising Foley, and there's a handful of Foley artists working with him. But what's your relationship with the Foley team?
There is definitely collaboration. I mean, we convey to them certain specific things that we want, and then Gary will play stuff for us, and we'll talk about it. Willard Overstreet was the Foley supervisor, so he was obviously dealing with Gary the most. Mm-hmm. We would periodically come in and play stuff back and talk about it. So it was there's definitely collaboration there.
Yeah. And I guess before we started recording, we were briefly talking just about the music of Michael Giacchino. The film opens with this great, the 1960 kind of Spider-Man theme from, I guess, the TV show. Is that where it's from?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, how does that influence your guys' work? What happens with the conversations with your mixers? Like, how does everything shift? Because I imagine you were probably just living in, the work that you're doing with Soul sound effects. So what happens when music shows up?
Well, we're definitely listening to our work against like the temp music track that's carried and built on throughout the whole schedule. Mm-hmm. So we have been listening to music as we're like building our effects, but it's not the final score.
Right.
To be perfectly honest, we didn't need to change our sound design once we did hear the final score. And it was really incumbent on Kevin O'Connell and Tony Lamberti, our fantastic mixers, to make everything work together. There's a lot of discussion about whether this is a music moment or if this is a sound effects moment. Mm-hmm. And throughout the whole thing, one of our initial edicts from our picture editor, Dan Liebenthal, was, dialogue is definitely king. He did not want to need to ever lean in to try to understand the dialogue. So those were all decisions that were made on the final mixing stage.
Nice. Yeah, and with your director John Watts, what is it like working with a director who I think is evidently, this is a really big film for him, being that he done a lot of smaller films. How would you describe his understanding of sound, of working with you and your team? What was the collaboration like with him?
He had the vision for the film, and that was obvious through the entire schedule.
Yeah.
And he was very tuned into the sound, and he had some really great ideas, and he also let us kind of run with the ball. Mm-hmm. I mean, this all sounds a little cliched and all, but it was really true, There's this one moment that just sort of shows how tuned in he was with the sound, and that was where he came in for one of the playbacks, and before he had come in, we had moved a sound effect 6 frames because it just felt like it worked better for us, right? Because we're doing that kind of thing all the time. Mm-hmm. And when he heard it back, he goes, yeah, that's right, but that one sound effect, it's feeling like it's a little bit late. So we advanced it 3 frames, and he said, no, it still feels a little bit late. And so we advanced it another 3 frames, and he goes, yeah, that's perfect. It feels right back where it was. So he's definitely was very in tune with the sound in a pretty cool way.
And I think a lot of this too is like there's aspects of comedic timing, there's kind of rhythm, and everyone is looking at the edit. How much collaboration do you have with your editor in a film like this?
Oh, it's a huge collaboration. I mean, it's whenever we were talking, I would say 90% of the time that we were talking with John, Dan Liebenthal and Debbie Berman were there as well and part of the conversation. Mm. So we would give sounds to Dan and to Debbie that to put into the Avid, mm-hmm. and then also early on in the schedule, there was a request to have a sound person in the cutting room helping out with like conforming, and then also helping out as additional visual effects were delivered to give sounds, and sometimes working very quickly. Mm-hmm. And our assistant, Andy Seisel, ended up in that role, and it's far beyond assistant work. I mean, he did some. I think he won't be doing assisting work anymore. He's
graduated.
Totally. He's a really great editor and a really creative sound designer as well. He did I don't know that you noticed, but when Vulture is, when we're seeing, sometimes when we're outside of his face, we can hear him breathe, and it's like this kind of gnarly, like kind of evil breathing, and that's all Andy's work.
Oh, fun. When it comes to immersive formats, this film, I guess you had an Atmos, a Barco, potentially. Was there an IMAX mix? What's the
Totally, yeah.
How many mixes?
You know that just FYI,
Yeah.
they like to it called it's Oro, not Barco.
Oro,
just
yes.
so you know.
Oro
Yeah.
11.1, presented by Barco. I know.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's because I think they're a wholly owned subsidiary
Sure.
of Barco. But anyway,
I appreciate it.
We actually did we did mixes for all the formats.
Yeah.
So and really it was Kevin and Tony who were the ones who were really. I mean, that's a mixing thing.
Yeah, sure.
So I was less like front and center with that.
Yep.
But we did it Atmos native.
Okay.
And so, our whole final was all Atmos.
Okay.
And the way we handled that was Tony did the work on the stage. We delivered stuff to the stage that had enough elements so that if Tony felt like it could go into the object tracks and be flown around the room, he could do that. And so, but he did that like on the pre-dub stage and on the final stage.
Yeah.
He would drag the sounds because we're right on the cusp of with the new software being able to pan into the objects from where they live.
Yeah.
But right now we have to have separate object tracks.
Okay.
So he would drag stuff down into the object tracks and fly it around the room. So we started with that, and then I'm almost positive they created a re-render of just the objects.
Okay.
And then that was sort of the basis for the Oro.
Okay.
So that because the Oro is basically it's like a 5.1 with a 5.0 on top.
Yep.
And so then that re-render of what was in the object tracks is sort of what's above you. And then they did some specific mixing, flavoring to taste once they actually heard it all together. And then we also spent time on the IMAX mix as well. One of the big differences with IMAX is how they handled the bass management, the sub, because in like the Dolby Atmos format, it's there's like a separate sub where you feed stuff to the sub, whereas in IMAX I think they roll off. I don't exactly know the frequency, but I'm just guessing, say 70 or something like that. From all of the speakers goes to the sub. There definitely there's some work that's done to make it so that like maybe there's not too much sub, and then we actually took our one of the busier reels both to the IMAX, their offices where they have a beautiful IMAX theater. Listen to see how it translated there, and then we also took it to the Chinese theater and to see how it translated in the Chinese theater. And it's actually very cool. And we learned that they do some really fun stuff as far as quality control. They sweep the room, I guess, every day, which is, one of the things about, it's just sort of a normal thing in this kind of creative process is you know that it's never going to sound as good as it does on the mixing stage everywhere. Yeah. As hard as everybody tries to make theater sound, great, it's not necessarily, there's plenty of theaters that just aren't quite up to snuff. And so when you hear about these efforts that are made to make the playback of these films at the highest level, it's exciting.
Yeah.
I've seen the film now with a paying audience, and even though I've seen the film 100 times, it's super rewarding to see it with hundreds of people who are having a good time who've never seen the film before. I just love this whole idea of the communal aspect of seeing a film, of feeling the energy of a bunch of people just having a real good time.
Do you find that you can get the perspective when you are in the 11th hour of mixing a film? Like, is it a matter of checking stuff off and saying, all right, this is good, let's move on? Or is it always like you said, it's you're still, nothing's locked until the film is done? So
well, really, I guess the way I think of it is it's a marathon.
Yeah,
because we do put in tremendous hours, and I guess there's an analogy in outside of work. I've done some really long
Yeah.
walks. It's something that's I don't even know why I've latched onto it, but I have. And even actually during this film, at the very beginning of the film, I turned 50 and I walked for 2 days straight for 50 hours
Yeah.
to celebrate my birthday. And it's definitely an endurance thing. And so, like in that particular walk, I was like halfway through the second day, and I was feeling really tired, and I was like, how the heck am I going to walk for another 20 hours,
Yeah.
And the same part of me that was able to do that is the same part of me that is able to, after working for 30 days straight,
Right.
to still we get another turnover, and we have to look through it to make sure that we've covered all the visual effects, and if there is something that's different, we have to put in a new sound. And yes, we're exhausted, yes, we're tired, but the thing that I always keep in my mind is that if I were to let off and do anything but 100%, I would be basically throwing away all of the hard work that I put in for the last however many months. Because when it gets down to it, the only pass that really matters is the last pass. You can do an amazing job for 9 months, and in the 10th month, or and then the 9 month plus 1 day, you go through and you're too tired, and so you just do like a crappy job. What millions of people see is the crappy job. They don't see, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's really it's a marathon, and all I'm thinking about when I'm in the middle of something like that is I'm not going to let my guard down, because I've invested too much in this. And so then, I think we all have these reserves in ourselves to do the kind of work where, you just, even when you're tired, you just don't let up, and you just keep on doing your absolute best work possible.
Do you have a preference or an opinion about the pros and cons of being in a supervising sound editor role versus just being an editor? I mean, what's the major difference of responsibility or your wide view of the project?
When you're in a supervisory capacity, there's a sense of responsibility that you don't necessarily feel, or you don't, it's not your responsibility when you're cutting. When you're cutting, you're doing the best job that you can, and you certainly feel a sense of responsibility to some degree, but there's always that other layer where if you can't make it happen,
Yeah.
it's somebody else's problem. Whereas when you're supervising, the buck stops with you. I mean, there's literally no option. If the client's not happy with the work, you have to dig deep and figure out something else.
Yeah.
And you know what? And the truth is, on every film, there is some element, some sound that you struggle with, And so when you're in the supervisory capacity, you have to figure that, whatever that sort of troublesome sound is, you have to figure it out. And then there's the whole layer of dealing with people and management, and then the whole layer of dealing with budgets, and the fact that, even on a big film, you always get the resources that you need, but sometimes it's a struggle, because it's common with any job in the world where you want to have unlimited resources, and it just doesn't exist,
At what point do you know that the film is going to be enjoyable? Like, was it when you read a script? Is it when you see, because are you seeing even the film in full from top to bottom? Like, when do you have a good sense of the project that you're going to work on? Like, how late does that happen?
Well, oftentimes we'll have a chance to read the script ahead of time, so you have a sense of it. And then we'll look at, as soon as we start working on the film, we get a turnover of wherever the cutting room is, wherever the cut is at that point, we'll get a chance to look at it. I think it's normal to make judgments about the film, but the truth is you never know how it's going to be received. So, I've worked on films that I thought were really great, and they didn't do great numbers at all, And the other kind of thing that I kind of think is funny is, when you work long enough, you do work on films that aren't so good, right?
Yeah, sure.
And the thing that's funny about it is, after you've worked on it for a while and you've seen it start, because we literally see these movies hundreds of times, right? You start drinking the Kool-Aid. You think, well, this movie isn't so bad after all.
Yeah. Just lastly, what would you say to to folks who are looking to get involved in these types of projects, when you do have opportunities to bring on new talent, like you said, you had this assistant that obviously showed really good work and went beyond the call of duty. What is it like to bring people on who are less experienced to a big project like this? I mean, I can't imagine that this experience, wouldn't be the best place to learn of how to work at this level.
I guess you could say it's in a way balancing your fears, because these movies are not easy to do. So you really want to have a really strong team, but at the same time, you want people to put people in a position of rising to the occasion and of surprising you in like really positive ways. It's really rewarding when you see people who take on new responsibilities and are working their way up in their careers. So it's a balancing act. You don't want to have somebody in a position where they're in over their head and will fail. But then also sometimes when people are in over their head, they thrive. So it's a balancing act of making sure that you have a team that's going to get the job done, but then also giving people great opportunities.
Nice. And I guess for you, the year is far from being over. So what's the rest of the year look like for what's on your plate?
Actually, right now I don't have anything. So it's quite possible this will be the last movie of my career.
No,
I'm kidding. I got my feelers out, and I'm actually looking forward to a little time off. Because it's been pretty intense on this film, and a little downtime is good for the soul.
Do you find that when you have time off that you still are reaching for your recorder and wanting to go out and record, or not really?
You know what? I have to say this. I'm almost a little embarrassed to admit this.
Yeah.
But I personally happen to I have a love for visual medium as well. So I love photography.
Yeah.
And I find myself reaching for my camera more than I do reaching for my recorder. And that's not to say that I do record sometimes.
Yeah.
And I certainly sometimes am out and about and wish I had a recorder because I hear something that's like really cool and I know that it could be useful in the future. But I also love images. I love taking pictures.
Yeah.
And I guess I think of that as creative cross-training. I think in a way that maybe makes me a better sound designer, sound editor, because anything I think that allows you to remain in that creative space, but maybe in a little different place in that creative space is beneficial.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for anyone who wants to follow I love your Instagram photos, your SFX Eric account. I'd say I'm putting a plug in only because I think it's a good point that it's great to get these other perspectives and also dig into some other aspects of things that inspire you. So it's a good, healthy balance. That's what we all need in our lives.
Yeah, it's funny. I've struggled. I think all creative people struggle with insecurities and feeling if they're good enough and feeling like they're a poser and all that stuff. And I think I've been working more recently in my life, even though I've been doing this for a while, at just appreciating what I am good at and just sort of accepting what I am good at. I'm not the greatest in certain areas, but I'm pretty darn good in other areas, and just trying to be okay with that,
Yeah, so cool. Well, Eric, thank you so much again, and for anyone who hasn't had a chance to check out Spider-Man: Homecoming, go check it out in theaters because it's one of those films, and especially if you can, go check it out in some of the immersive formats because there is a substantial difference in the experience, and I think the one that I saw was probably a 5.1 or probably a 7.1. I can only imagine that there's a lot going on with all the flying and swinging and everything else you guys are dealing with. So thank you again. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in to my chat with Eric Norris about the sound of Spider-Man: Homecoming. You can hear more conversations with sound designers, composers, and directors on the Soundworks Collection podcast on iTunes and streaming online at soundworkscollection.com. And lastly, we'd love it if you went online and gave us a rating on iTunes. If you enjoyed this talk, we'd love it if you give us 5 stars and leave a review. And if you or someone you know is working on an exciting project and would be interested in being featured on our podcast, please send us an email at info@soundworkscollection.com. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.